Hi, and welcome back. In the synth world, you can find low-pass filters everywhere. High-pass filters are a little less common, and bandpass filters even more so. But bandpass filters can create unique sounds, and in many ways you can use them as high and low-pass filters as well. So they're great sound design tools, especially if you have 3 of them, like in the ADDAC 603 triple bandpass filter. In this video, I'll explain the power of bandpass filters, go over the functions and features of the ADDAC 603, and then dive into a series of patches. If you'd like to support this video series, or you want to get access to the PDF sheets of the illustrations I use in this and many of my other videos, have a look at my Patreon. You can also support my channel by using my affiliate links the next time you buy any kind of new gear, or just those few cables you need anyway. But now, let's dive right in. Let's have a quick look at the bandpass filter and how it can be used to create other types of filtering. You can easily visualize the effect of a filter by drawing a curve over the frequency spectrum of a sound. The common low-pass filter lets low frequencies pass while cutting out high frequencies. The high-pass filter lets high frequencies pass while cutting out low frequencies. A bandpass filter is a combination of those functions. It cuts out both high and low frequencies, and only allows a band of frequencies to pass. On a bandpass filter, you can use the common frequency control to set the central point for the band. But you also have control over the bandwidth of the filter to set the range of frequencies that can pass on. With a proper bandpass filter, you can use these 2 settings to imitate other filter types. For example, when you set the bandwidth to narrow and the frequency to the minimum, you can use the bandwidth control to create the effect of a low-pass filter. Similarly, when set to the maximum frequency, you can use the bandwidth like a high-pass filter. The only thing to keep in mind here is that because the band has some width, it won't always close all sounds, and the feedback or resonance point is still related to the cutoff point set by the frequency, not the bandwidth. But for most purposes, a good bandpass filter can be used as a multimode filter. As with pretty much all modules from ADDAC, the front panel of the 603 is packed with jacks and controls. On the top left of the module, you find controls for each of the 3 filters. Each filter has an input gain knob, which you can set with a switch between a ×3 or ×100 amplification, the latter one of course functioning as a distortion. There is a manual frequency control, a switch to set the filter slope between a more gentle 6 or more bitey 12 dB per octave cut, and a manual control for the bandwidth as well as the feedback. Each filter has an output level control as well as a phase invert switch. This is interesting when processing sounds in parallel and you want to experiment with or avoid phase cancellation. Each filter has its own CV control section, with an input for the frequency, bandwidth, and output level, which I noticed very much controls the level of distortion in combination with the input gain knob. Each of these inputs comes with a bipolar attenuator. Then each filter has its own audio input, which are normaled from each filter to the next, making parallel processing very easy. Each filter has an individual audio output as well. Finally, for using the filters in a parallel setup, there is an internal mixing section. You can use the individual filter levels to create a mix, but you can also mix in the dry signal you feed into the first filter. That control comes with its own CV input as well as an attenuator. There's a separate output for the mix of the 3 filters, as well as a mix of all filters plus the dry input. But that's more than enough talking. Let's make some patches. The true power of the ADDAC 603 is combining multiple filters to create interesting sounds. I'll build up complexity of the patches towards the end of the video. But let's start with a few single filter setups. You can use a single bandpass filter to create a very dynamic setup. Just use an oscillator, sequencer, and envelope to create a simple voice. As I showed you in the beginning, in this setup you can use the bandpass filter in different functions. If you set the frequency to minimum and use the envelope to widen the bandwidth, you create a simple low-pass filter setup. The fun here is that by manually controlling the central frequency, bandwidth, as well as the bipolar attenuators for the incoming envelope, you can morph the function of the filter from low through band to high pass. Because the filters offer control voltage input for both the frequency as well as the bandwidth, you can create very dynamic modulation. When used as a simple drone voice, for example by feeding the filter a complex waveform, you can use two independent slow LFOs to create interesting movement. When used with enough spread, the filter will move from low to band to high pass with varying settings. And then there's a separate control voltage input for the output level. With moderate input gain, this can be used as a fairly clean VCA, so no external VCA is needed. For example, in a simple voice with a sequencer triggering two envelopes with different settings. By the way, in this video you will see me using the ADDAC 506 as envelope and LFO. If you'd like to learn more, make sure to watch my video about it after this video as well. The level control is also great with higher gain and feedback settings, effectively becoming a voltage control distortion. For example, in the drone setup with a slow random voltage to the frequency, you can use something like a sample and hold signal to create clocked overdrive. Having three independent filters, you can use these setups on individual sounds. I'll just give you one example. Besides using the voice we used in the last patch, let's use one filter with a sequencer to create a higher melodic voice. The sequencer is clocked from the last voice. And finally, use white noise through the third filter to create a hi-hat sound, by modulating the level with another envelope clocked with the same clock. I wanted to spend a bit of time showing you these single filter patches, because let's be honest, the ADDAC 603 is a big module with a serious price tag. But beside a module that you can use for complex sound sculpting, you basically get three powerful independent filters. Let's step it up a bit though and make some patches combining two filters on the same sound. A simple classic setup is using two filters in series. With each bandpass filter being so flexible, you can use this setup for many different functions. For example, you can use the first filter like a low-pass filter and the second like a high-pass filter to cut out low frequencies and create controlled mid-range drone textures. A simple LFO is modulating the first filter in this patch. But in a dual setup, bandpass filters can add unique textures to your sound. For example, in a simple voice where the first filter is used in a low-pass setup, opened by an envelope. Then the sound goes through the second filter, used as a narrow bandpass with some resonance. You can use a slow source like an LFO or random voltage to create subtle dynamics. In the same setup, you can experiment by sending a copy of the envelope to both filters at the same time. You can use the envelopes to modulate either the frequency or bandwidth. And, of course, add LFOs wherever you like to create more motion over time. You can create different textures in the same setup by changing how the filters are used. For example, you can use the first filter as a narrow bandpass with a lot of feedback, and have a slow LFO sweep that filter up and down. Then use a triggered envelope to open the width of the second filter, used more as a low pass. Using two filters in parallel creates different options. For starters, you can easily create wonderful stereo sounds. For example, set up a simple voice and run it through two filters with the same settings. Here, the envelopes are used on the frequency of both filters. Then just use a single LFO to modulate the bandwidth of both filters, but use the attenuators to create an inverted effect on one of them. This creates subtle shifts in the stereo field. Here is a very similar setup, but this time a controller is used to send a 1V per octave signal to the oscillator. The envelope opening both filters is triggered by a free running clock, and an additional LFO is used to modulate the speed of the LFO that's causing the stereo width. You don't need to use parallel filters in stereo, of course. For example, you can run the same sound through two bandpass filters and then mix the result together. Here, a crossfader is used to mix an oscillator with white noise. When used with more narrow bands and audible resonant peaks, you can create very dynamic sounds. In this example, an LFO is modulating the frequency of both filters, one with inverse polarity. And finally, a Bernoulli gate is used to divide a steady clock over two envelopes, modulating the bandwidth of the filters. Finally, let's create some patches using all three filters to sculpt a single sound. To give you an idea of the sound shaping power, let's feed a mix of steady saw wave oscillators into the three bandpass filters with varying settings. The flowchart shows a mixer at the end for clarity, but here the mix output of the ADDAC 603 is used. Just a single LFO is modulating the frequency of one of the filters. To turn this patch into a more self-playing setup, let's add some time-based modulation. A clock is driving a probabilistic gate, sending the pulse to either of three envelopes, each with different settings. Those envelopes control the level of each of the filters. Finally, the clock also drives a short plucky envelope, opening a second filter with higher resonance. Here is an example in a more melodic setup. A single oscillator is sent into all three filters and mixed together using the mix output. A sequencer is used to tune the oscillator and trigger a single plucky envelope that is modulating the bandwidth of all three filters. Finally, three independent, free-running LFOs are used. Two are modulating the frequency, one is modulating the level. With each filter offering a unique result, you can combine them to create complex, layered sounds. You can still use the individual outputs of the filters to create other effects, like complex stereo setups, for example. Here, the same setup as the last patch is used, but instead of using the sum output, two filters are sent to individual mixers to create a stereo signal. Then the third filter is sent to a panner, and those left and right outputs are mixed in with the other stereo signal. Another LFO is used to modulate the panner. I hope you can see the possibilities here are endless. All of the patches I made with one or two filters can be made more interesting by adding a third. The flowcharts also get more complex quickly though, so I'll leave further exploration to you. If you'd like to learn more about the ADDAC 506 or 112, have a look at any of these videos. Also, smash that like, subscribe and bell button if you want to see more modular content from me. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching and see you next time.